Welcome to Breaking Woke, how to identify, debunk, and dismantle politically correct ideas. My name is Douglas Kruger. I'm the author of the global new book, Political Correctness Does More Harm Than Good. In the previous video, we looked at what I like to call the 3 laws of robotic liberalism. This is the mindset behind the scenes by which liberals and folks on the far left are able to insulate themselves against feedback from history and maintain the idea, despite all evidence, that they are obviously the good guys and obviously in the right. Essentially, it goes like this. We operate from good intentions. That makes us the good guys. Anything that goes wrong cannot be from us because good intentions can't possibly go wrong. Anything that has happened in history that is bad cannot be attributed to us because we're the good guys because we come from good intentions. And by means of this mindset, they are able to shield themselves, to immunize themselves against real-world feedback. Now, that was a look at the thinking behind the scenes. We went back one stage. Now let's go forward a step and look at the results of that kind of thinking. And today I'd like to share with you how the policies from the left, the problem with them is not merely that they don't work. It is again that they don't work and also can't be reasoned with. They are underpinned and defended by a certain sanctimoniousness that is informed by this idea. Because we have good intentions, we are obviously on the right side of history. And today we're going to look at how the left thinks backwards, or perhaps better stated, how they attempt to solve problems by making the problem worse. The analogy for this one is, imagine you have half a glass of milk and your goal is to have an empty glass. If you were sane, sound and sensible, you would pour the glass of milk out and you would have your empty glass. The liberal and leftist approach to this is different. It believes in magic. Instead, it goes like this. If you just add more milk, eventually the milk will overflow and that's how you'll get rid of the milk. Genius. So let's look at how this works, and we'll begin with a scene setter, and then I'll give you 4 practical examples from the world of leftist politics. The first one, Hitler begins his ascent in Germany, and Neville Chamberlain makes the decision that the right way to stop a tyrant is to give him everything he wants, to concede to all of his demands, and to accede to everything he asks for. Now, if you are sane, sound and sensible, you might look at that glass of milk and you might think to yourself, the way to stop evil is to stop evil. You oppose it, you fight it, you shut it down, you do not enable it. But viewed from a sort of progressive mindset, and here we must be fair, Chamberlain was in fact a conservative. He was not, however, as conservative as Winston Churchill, who supplanted him. Chamberlain looked at this and said, what we will do is we will enable him, and that will stop evil in its tracks, that will stop a tyrant. Now, there is no mechanism by which enabling tyranny shuts it down. This is the idea of pouring more milk into a glass in order to get rid of it. Surely, though, we would not continue to repeat such mistakes. Well, let's take a look at a number of things that have happened in the world from that time period right up to today, and some of them that are still happening. So, at about the same time as this, in the Soviet Union, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the author of the Gulag Archipelago, points out that there were mass arrests and mass genocide beginning to take root and beginning to take on momentum in the Soviet Union. I think it was Stalin himself who said it best when he said that 1 death is a tragedy, 1,000,000 deaths is a statistic. And you start to get the sense of how revoltingly evil the Soviet Union actually was. I mean, just one example, something that we don't typically talk about today. The arrests of civilians, people who were taken to the Gulag, were not based necessarily on their having done anything wrong. The folks doing the arresting had quotas to meet. You have a quota for each populace and each city. And so the most common reaction to an arrest by a Soviet, which would be followed by torture, interrogation, and incarceration, usually for 10 years, sometimes for 20 or 25, was sheer bafflement. People would simply go along with it because they believed this would all be sorted out. They obviously hadn't done anything wrong. Turns out the jailers simply had a quota to meet. You had to arrest enough people, and that's your Soviet socialist utopia for you. So while this was going on, there was a school of thought in the world of dialectic materialism, which is the philosophy underpinning Marxism and communism, that said, once we get this right, the state disappears. The idea is, once everybody becomes egalitarian and socialist and collectivist and we are all equal, we won't need a government anymore. So there won't be any government tyranny. Now, Alexander Solzhenitsyn points this out, and he says that it had become very noticeable among the Soviet leadership that the tyranny was becoming worse. And they spoke about it, and they said the way to solve it is to add more government. Just pour more milk into the glass. So they attempted to solve the problem of government tyranny by adding more government. That's how it works. Now, at the same time as that, that's on the far radical left. Let's jump across the sea and speak to Franklin Delano Roosevelt at about the same time. At this point in time, America is going through the Great Depression. And a couple of the interesting things to note about the Great Depression, for decades afterwards, liberals and leftists got away with the claim that the Great Depression was the result of capitalism. And they were gazing across the pond at Russia at the same time that these people were being arrested and incarcerated and going through one of the biggest genocides in human history carried out by their government. While that was going on, people in FDR's America were looking across at that and saying, we should really get us some more of that. That's the route to go. We need to become more socialist. And FDR, they're going through a depression. So the liberal left had gotten away with, for some decades, the idea that the failure was on the part of capitalism. Modern scholarship has utterly debunked that. It comes to the conclusion that the Great Depression could have been shortened by 7 years if the government had done nothing. The problem was that the government stepped in and did not allow the market to recover. Now, we could spend a great deal of time on that one, but let's just take a look at that one dynamic, the filling up of the glass with more milk. America did not have enough jobs or enough food. So what did the government do? What it did was it raised minimum wages and thereby catastrophically destroyed the possibility of employment, and it burned food. It took food, fresh farmed produce, by the millions of tons and destroyed it. So what do? If you don't have enough jobs and enough food, you have to make it harder to get a job and you have to destroy the food. You have to be either an imbecile or evil. Let's assume that these folks were not evil, and we will give them the benefit of the doubt and simply call them imbeciles. That's example number 2. Example number 3. So, would we ever make these mistakes again? Surely not. Surely not. Because, of course, we look back over history and we learn lessons, and that is how we progress. Except that that's not how progressives work. The whole progressive institution is about looking at your scenario and saying, we can fix that. We can do social engineering and make it better in one go, which is exactly what the Soviet Union did and what FDR did during the Great Depression. The idea of learning from the past is a conservative value. People like to mock conservatives by saying they are backward-looking. No, they take the best of what has come before and look forward through that lens. They are not radical revolutionaries. They are practicing the scientific method. What has worked before? What has been vetted before? How can we use that going forward? Of course you can change, of course you can evolve, of course you can progress, but you do it with the best of what we have learned, not the folks on the liberal left. So, have we made the mistake again recently? Yes. To keep the world safe from a nuclear Iran, what do we have to do? We have to give Iran nuclear power. So this one, of course, attributable to liberal President Barack Obama. And the scenario was that the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism, the very folks who like to stand up and say, death to America, wanted to go nuclear. Now, what could possibly go wrong with that? And Barack Obama, with a straight face, told the American people and the world that in order to stop Iran from becoming a nuclear threat, what we really had to do was give them nuclear power. You have to be an imbecile or the class clown or evil to think that adding more milk makes the milk problem go away. Now, in this particular case, I'm not entirely certain that we can take evil off the table. When you are dealing and interacting with the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism, and you have pledged an oath to protect your nation, you've sworn to God that you will carry out that duty, and they are saying death to America, and you help them to get nuclear power. Oh, I think we're stretching things to say that it was imbecilic. It leans toward evil. Correct me if you think I'm wrong. Example number 4. Right, California today. Very recently, California had a massive surge in drugs. Now, if you are sound, sane, or sensible, what you would do, like Winston Churchill, is you would oppose the bad force. You wouldn't enable it. What they did instead in California is they said, you know the real problem? The real problem is not the narcotics. The real problem is not the drug trade. The real problem is nothing to do with drugs. The problem is the stigma. Oh my goodness, stigma. Stigma is when people judge people for using drugs. And of course, that can hurt their feelings. The holy grail of liberal reasoning is feelings. It's not about feedback. It's not about what actually happens in the real world. It's about feelings and offense. So what did they do? They destigmatized drug use, they decriminalized it, they stopped prosecuting users, and they provided free needles to drug addicts. Now, the thing that happened next was astonishing. I mean, this was just, if you were a liberal, you could not see this coming. This was just unthinkable according to your worldview. Drug usage increased. Astonishing. Who could possibly have seen that coming? It turns out that if you appease a dictator and give him everything he wants, he gets stronger. And it turns out that if you give free needles to drug addicts and you make it easier to do drugs, you get more drug users. Who could ever have seen that one coming? Now, there is even a philosopher on the left who has formalized this into philosophy. And off the top of my head, I forget his name. It's either Derrida or it is one of his ilk and one of his descendants, who came up with what he calls the truth event. The truth event is such a delightful mechanism by which to insulate yourself from cause and effect. It is as anti-science as you can get and as emotional in its reasoning as you could hope to be. The left loves this sort of thing. So looking at a failed Soviet Union and looking at the genocide and starvation of tens of millions of human beings, this bright philosopher points out that it's not about the actual truth of what happens in the real world. That's less important than fighting for the truth event. And of course, the truth event is based on feelings of egalitarianism and communitarianism and us all being equal. And okay, so a few tens of millions, 100 million people died as the result of our philosophy, but that's not the important bit. We mustn't look at the real world for factual feedback. Instead, we must fight for the truth event. And there you have in operation what I call the 3 laws of robotic liberalism. The idea that if your intentions are good, it can't possibly go wrong, because good intentions make you good. And if it goes wrong, then it's not from you, because you're good because you have good intentions. They have formalized it into philosophy. Thank God for intelligent philosophers like Sir Roger Scruton, who utterly debunks that one. If that sort of thing interests you, read the book Fools, Frauds, and Firebrands by Roger Scruton. It is a heavy read. It is really for the philosophically well-trained. He dismantles every one of these, what he calls nonsemes, one by one. He takes the time and trouble, not just to put an impressive leftist book up on a shelf and say, philosophy, but to actually look at what they're saying and to point out why it's garbage. So folks, those are 4 quick examples of how the left thinks backwards, how they try to solve a problem by making that problem worse. Do you have another example? Leave an example in the comment section for us below, and if you find these videos helpful, please do share them. The idea is, our children have to live in this world tomorrow. If our children have to live in a world in which feelings of righteousness prevail over feedback in terms of what actually happens to living human beings, Do they get murdered as a result of your good intentions? Our kids are going to be in trouble. It matters that we dissect the terrible reasoning, the awful philosophy, and the irrationality of leftist thinking. There, in a nutshell, is how it works. It starts in the background with our good intentions, and we are immune to feedback as a result of those good intentions, and it progresses out into solving problems by making the problem worse. And if it goes wrong, it can't be us because we're the people of good intentions. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to this channel, and if this sort of topic matter interests you, please do consider buying the book Political Correctness Does More Harm Than Good.